This meeting is being recorded.
So thank you, everyone. I'm Priya Krishnamurthy. I'm the founder and CEO of 200 Million Artisans. 200 Million Artisans really started out as a COVID response initiative back in 2020, and we've sort of changed, transformed, and become what we call an ecosystem enabler, bridging gaps in knowledge, resources, and partnerships for the artisan sector as a whole. One of our primary goals is to make information and evidence accessible for all stakeholders involved. Uh, so, as part of that, we launched our flagship research project, which is Business of Handmade, which focused on informality. And thereafter, we have been supported. We got a grant and we were supported by C3 Grant Making, which is Omidyar, MacArthur, and Rockefeller Foundations, to carry out perhaps the first research of its kind ever in the world, where we are mapping the investment needs and challenges for craft based enterprises, starting with India. And this conversation is really, something that emerged from a lot of conversations we've had with investors as well as enterprises. These are enterprises that we've spoken with either for Business of Handmade, part one or part two. And we've honestly learned a lot from these enterprises and their journeys. And we're really thankful to, people who have been sharing their stories with us. And with this session, we hope that a lot of the enterprises who are joining us, people as interested stakeholders who are joining us, can also learn from the journeys of these enterprises. And with that, I will introduce our enterprises for today and the speakers for today. I'll start with Sreejith Nedumpally. He is the co-founder and director of Rope International. Rope manufactures and exports craft-based and handmade home and lifestyle products from natural materials. Sreejith is also head cluster development livelihoods finance at Mumbai-based Swakarma Finance. So he also wears both hats, both that of an entrepreneur as well as that of a funder. Previously, he was the India director at Seattle-based Upaya Social Ventures. He has over 15 years of experience working with social enterprises, SMEs, and MSMEs, especially in the craft sector enterprises, both as an entrepreneur as well as an investor. Thank you so much, Srijit, for joining us. Really glad to have you here. With that, I'll move on to Gauri, Gauri Malik. She is the founder and director of Sirohi. Gauri comes from a finance and economics background and studied at UK's Warwick Business School. She began her career as an investment banker and thereafter sort of founded the Skilled Samaritan Foundation early in 2012. Sirohi is the trademark brand of SSF, a sustainable luxury brand that fuses modern design with traditional craft to handcraft home and lifestyle products. Please do take a look at her work. The products are quite fabulous. And there is something, the fact that they also recycle and upcycle is a fascinating way to also look at building value for the craft sector. Gauri has been awarded several accolades for her work with low income communities in Northern India, including the British Council Alumni Awards, Women Transforming India by Niti Aayog, UN Women Generation Equality Award, and many more. She is a young mother. She has a year-old daughter, loves outdoors and family vacations, enjoys meeting and learning from stories and experiences, and is determined to bring about change for women who want to work but lack opportunities. And you will hear that as she speaks today. Nitin is once again, he's the co-founder of iTokri, one of the most, I think, when we talk about systems thinking entrepreneurs, he's one of the few that, we have come across and really inspired by his journey. He is an alumnus of Delhi University in Hindi literature, so you will find him speaking in Hindi today. He is deeply inspired by Ramshankar Yadav, also known as Vidrohi, an Indian poet and social activist who tried to sensitize society against gender discrimination and economic inequality through his poems. So back in Nitin started his journey really as a award-winning documentary filmmaker based on the life and poetry of his mentor. But thereafter, he and his wife started iTokri in 2010, a sustainable lifestyle brand that represents Indian handicrafts and handloom industry and connects customers and artisans on one platform. Nitin modeled iTokri on the lines of his mentor's vision of India. iTokri today has a team of 95% women who come from economically backward strata of the society and caters to a very discerning domestic and global audience who are enthusiastic about Indian handicrafts and handloom. Um, you can also check out Nitin's case study in greater detail on www.businessofhandmade.com. He was one of the case studies and enterprises that we looked into and featured when we talked about informality in the last, session or last project of Business of Handmade. With that, I'd just like to invite and thank each one of you for joining in and being part of this conversation. Thank you to the audience as well. I'll jump straight into questions, really, and it's not really a question in as much as more of a conversation with you guys. So I'd like to start by asking you, could you, one, tell for the benefit of the audience, tell us more about your enterprise, your work, how did the whole business model come about? And so far, how have you managed to fund your enterprise and keep it self-sustainable? I can invite somebody or somebody can just jump in and go for it. Or perhaps I'll
Okay,
go. Yeah, Gauri, do you
I'll
want
go
to?
first.
Yeah.
I always like going first. Okay, so hi everyone. So great to have everyone part of this session, and some really exciting people here from the design space, from the content space. So thank you for joining us. So Sirohi is a very young social enterprise. We're a hybrid model. We have a not-for-profit and we have a for-profit. Essentially, we're just a 2.5-year-old brand, in the sense of it. And for us, I think when we started out, for us, what we thought of, what we wanted to do was, create livelihood opportunities for women. That it has always been the focus at Sirohi. But what I realized over time was that while creating income opportunities, you have to sustain what you're doing, because that circles back to the women you work with, right? Because if they don't have enough sales, how are you going to essentially sustain them? And they're not yet at a space, a lot of artisans in India, where they can sort of sell their products on online marketplaces. They're very dependent on offline markets, whether it's Dastakar, whether it's local trade shows, hearts, and things like that. So very quickly, I realized that to scale what we're doing and to continue supporting the artisan community, we have to think like a business, like any other sort of brand who is selling a product. We have to make a product that's beautiful, that's well designed. It needs to be marketed really well. So if you have to think like a business, you have to think like any other brand that there is out there, right? Whether it's a Good Earth, whether it's a Nicobar. And that's why funding is very important, because to take that funding route, it expedites a lot of things, whether it is support in terms of hiring, resources, getting like people who have the right kind of experience to work with you, spending on talent, spending on essentially designers, on marketing your products. So very early on, as a founder, I've applied for, you start with, I think, applying for a lot of accelerator programs, incubator programs, because the numbers don't do justice to sort of invite investor support, in your early days. And, we've been fortunate enough to get accepted into a bunch of government schemes as well, to get the support and the funding to be able to set up a facility, where women can come and work, which works as a raw material bank, and even for buyers to come and see what we're doing essentially. So for us funding, I think of Sirohi as a business, as any other sort of company, that's looking to sell a beautiful product, have a large customer base. And I think, and if you have that thought process, for us, getting the right kind of investors on board, and getting funding is very important. So that's my take on it, based on my limited experience in the field.
Thanks, Gauri. I mean, Nitin is next on my screen. Do you want to go next?
Yeah, I can. मैं शुरू कर देता हूँ. तो iTokri हम लोगों ने शुरू किया था 2012 में, when I mean there was not many people in the internet e-commerce space that much, and there was just the Flipkart and a couple of other sites, and no one actually in the craft sector who was able to do the things what we intend to do. And उस समय क्या हम लोगों ने ये रियलाइज किया कि जो पूरा ई कॉमर्स का सेट है, जो जनरली जिस तरीके से ई कॉमर्स को लोग इंडिया में देख रहे हैं, वो क्राफ्ट के लिए बिल्कुल भी सूटेबल नहीं है. वो बेसिकली एक स्टैंडर्डाइज मशीन मेड प्रोडक्ट के लिए बना हुआ है. तो we tried experimenting, and over the period of time we have kind of developed our own model of doing e-commerce in craft sector within the craft sector ecosystem. तो वो हमारा पूरा एक स्पेशलाइजेशन है उसको लेके कि कैसे हम क्राफ्ट को ऑनलाइन करते हैं, क्योंकि जनरली जो बाकी ई कॉमर्स सिस्टम्स हैं वो ये चाहते हैं कि आप एक ही पर्टिकुलर प्रोडक्ट को ज्यादा से ज्यादा बार बार रीस्टॉक करें, बार बार सेल करें, बट क्राफ्ट में ये पॉसिबल नहीं होता क्योंकि वो इंडस्ट्री उस तरीके से काम नहीं करती. एवरी प्रोडक्ट इज यूनिक, सो यू हैव टू कैटलॉग एवरी प्रोडक्ट every time it is coming again into the store, so it becomes really difficult. So we have kind of devised our own systems how we do it. And in terms of funding, I mean, we never went that route because yeah, I mean, we thought since inception कि ये थोड़ा सा डिफिकल्ट है और हमारे लिए होगा नहीं, क्योंकि सब लोग डिस्करेज ही करते थे कि ये क्राफ्ट में तो कोई इतना नहीं है फंडिंग, तो हम लोग कभी गए भी नहीं उस तरीके से. और जनरली जो ईयर 1 से ही हम लोग प्रॉफिटेबल थे, और तो हम लोगों ने अपने प्रॉफिट्स को ही अपने बिजनेस में इन्वेस्ट किया, और ऐसे ही धीरे धीरे करके ओवर द पीरियड ऑफ टाइम ग्रो किया. बैंक का सपोर्ट लिया, बैंक लिमिट और डेट से काम किया. तो अभी अभी तक भी हम लोग ये इसी स्पेस में ही काम करते रहे हैं, और हम लोगों ने कोई एक्सटर्नल ऐसा फंडिंग के लिए अभी तक आगे नहीं बढ़े. बट एक पॉइंट पे आके अब हमको ऐसा लगने लगा है कि इसमें पोटेंशियल बहुत है, चीजें बहुत ही ऑटो मोड में चल रही हैं और बहुत स्मूथ है, और स्केल का बहुत पोटेंशियल है. हम यहाँ भी बढ़ सकते हैं, ये भी कर सकते हैं, बिकॉज वी हैव अ ह्यूज कस्टमर बेस, द ब्रांड इज देयर नाउ, and people recognize and connect with the brand altogether. So there is a lot of space in terms of growing. और उसको आगे बढ़ने के लिए एक कुछ एक्सटर्नल फाइनेंशियल टूल्स की रिक्वायरमेंट हमको अभी नजर आई है. ऐसा लग रहा है कि मतलब काफी पोटेंशियल है, तो हम लोग एक्सप्लोर करने की तरफ बढ़े हैं. बट अभी तक जिधर भी जा रहे हैं तो वो उनके जो जो समझ है फंडिंग को लेकर के, या जिस तरह से लोग अप्रोच करते हैं इन्वेस्टर्स या जो भी है पूरा, तो वो क्राफ्ट को एज ए इंडस्ट्री, उसकी जो डायनामिक्स है उसको उतना नहीं समझ पाते हैं कि ये कैसे चलती है. तो वो उसको बाकी जो स्टैंडर्डाइज प्रोडक्शन सेट्स है ना, वो उन्हीं इंडस्ट्रीज के साथ इसको कंपेयर करने लगते हैं. तो यहाँ पे जो है वो थोड़ा सा डिफरेंस बनने लगता है. तो ये बहुत कमी तो बहुत है कि मतलब हमारे लिए कोई उस तरह का टूल नहीं है इस सेक्टर के लिए कि क्या हम यूज कर सकते हैं. ग्रांट्स हैं, बट सी ग्रांट्स आर नॉट मेड फॉर बिजनेसेस. दैट मेरे को हमेशा से लगता है कि ग्रांट तो आप एक बार दे दोगे, 2 बार दे दोगे, बट अगर बिजनेस को सस्टेनेबल और प्रॉफिटेबल बनाना है तो उसके लिए आपको कुछ एक ऐसा टूल चाहिए जो उसको जो है उसमें अंदर इन्वेस्ट हो और उसको धीरे धीरे जो है वो सस्टेनेबिलिटी की तरफ ले जाए.
Thank you. Thanks, Nitin. Sreejith, over to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Priya, and good evening, everyone. So I will first tell you where we are right now. Then we'll actually go to how it all started and how we started and where we started. So we are primarily right now a manufacturing company. We call ourselves a crafts-based handmade manufacturing company. We work entirely on B2B basis, at the moment focusing entirely on exports. And so our business model is basically about onboarding what we call key account buyers, who are largely the retailers around the world, lucky to get some good names out there. And so they auditors, the inspectors, then they add us into the supply chain, and we keep developing new collections for them, or they get back to us with their requirements, and we manufacture that using the artisans that we work with. Now over a period of last 10-14 years, we moved away from a kind of a distributed model to more and more of a factory-based model. Still, actually, I mean, having a cluster, but at the heart of the cluster is our own manufacturing unit, which is compliant, internationally certified, and where our buyers can obviously come and audit us. And then we have a community of artisans in the cluster, where we also train them in different skills and then bring them to the factory. So it's largely now more of a factory-based production of handmade products. Again, focusing entirely on the home segment. So we take pride in saying that we make things that makes a home, or you feel at home with with what we do. And diversifying within the home into various segments. Like we started with baskets, we then moved to handloom woven table mats, table runners, and then moved to lampshades, then pot hangers, and various other goods within the household. That's where actually we see the market is growing tremendously. And in fact, coming to probably a future question from Priya, COVID actually, opened a huge market opportunity for us, as all of us were closeted inside our houses. The market for household products actually leapfrogged or expanded quite hugely. Now, coming to how we started and where we started. See, it was in 2008. I was in IIT Madras working with a few interesting startups in the incubation cell there. I was a part of the team that was managing the incubator there. That's when few of us thought this idea that, come on, we need to do something for the Indian manufacturing sector, use technology to do something for the Indian manufacturing, especially, take manufacturing to villages or into smaller towns. At that time, one of the buzzwords was rural BPO. So few of us thought, okay, let's like rural BPO, can we take manufacturing to smaller areas and use technology coming from IIT Madras. But then very soon we realized that there has to be something there within the villages or communities that we take and value add to that. Otherwise, bringing something totally alien to the village environment or to the communities that we work with is not going to be sustainable. So then we slowly moved to what is called sustainable manufacturing. And that was the time when I actually met some of my current partners, especially IKEA. IKEA had an office in Chennai at that point of time. And they were actually explaining to me the problems with Indian suppliers, especially in the global scenario. Why Indian craftsmen or craft organizations are not able to capture the global market or not even able to penetrate the global market. And why someone like, for example, a small country like Vietnam is actually, having a lion's share in some of the products like baskets, for example. And whether it is Vietnam or Bangladesh or even someone like Bali Deeps, a small cluster of islands was actually, was doing more in the global market than India. And this was actually kind of corroborated with our own market research. We, my co-founder, we actually visited a few retailers around the world, and you saw beautiful products, the kind of products that we can do, our artisans can do, but we were not there in the scene. And why was that, or why is that? Everyone told us that there is no organized supply chain in India. India has beautiful crafts, beautiful crafts traditions, beautiful skills, timeless skills, but there is simply no organized supply chain. There is simply no understanding of quality or anything that is associated with an organized manufacturing system. And so that was one of the challenges for us, and we took up that challenge. Quite fortunately, someone like IKEA and then later, a few others like Fab India, etc., actually were willing to experiment with us. And then we started working on addressing these challenges, that how do we create an organized supply chain? How do we create something that is reliable and responsive manufacturing system and so on? So we primarily approached the whole space as a manufacturer, as someone, as a cluster builder who builds volumes within a cluster with compliance and with volumes. And obviously, as you all can understand, the journey was not easy. It's quite tough and we had an interesting conversation around scale earlier, so we'll come back to that later. But yes, 10, 14, 15 years down the line, we are still there. learning a lot, but hopefully, I mean, and slowly we are actually disproving that myth that India, in fact, India is actually, I mean, much more in the global supply chain than earlier, and we are part of that. So yeah, that's where we are.
Thank you, Sreejith. Thanks. With that, I mean, now that we have a sense of where each enterprise and what their business model is, what is it that they're doing, I'm going to jump straight into the funding conversation. In the different stages of an enterprise's journey, and obviously you are all at different stages, what kind of investment or funding was or is useful? Like, what is it that enterprises need to be mindful of? In your journeys, what are some of the, what have been some of your learnings, and what are typically the kind of common mistakes that enterprises make when raising funds or choosing not to raise funds? Who would like to go first? Gauri, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like I said, I'm probably like the youngest sort of entrant into the artisan space compared to Sreejith and Nitin. And for me, like I said, for us, I realize this challenge as well. I spent a lot of time reading and understanding that, world markets essentially have uh, suppliers from different countries like Bali, Bangladesh, Africa, Sri Lanka. And why is India only, let's say, we contribute to maximum 3% of the global handicraft sort of market, right? It's a very, very strong contribution considering India is, the artisan economy is the second largest sort of employment generator in the country after agriculture. So why is it so? And I think exactly what Sreejith said is that lack of an organized supply chain. If we have to sort of meet the demands of international retailers, brands, and provide sustained income to the artisans, I think the most important aspect is having that sort of supply chain with the right kind of quality checks, the ability to sort of like produce in volume. It's not a factory made model, right? It's handcrafted products. So there are going to be sort of idiosyncrasies. It's not going to be the same product. So I think that funding piece is important to be able to create that supply chain, right? To be able to have the right kind of vendors who are going to be able to give you the right possible raw materials, right? At Sirohi, we make a lot of products from ropes, textile waste, from cotton ropes, from waste plastic ropes. So while the sustainability story is amazing, at the end of it, a person, if they see a product on the website or in a photo, they want exactly that, right? And it's a product. At the end of it, you're paying for it, whether it's made by an artisan, whether it's a craft product. You want a great product in your home, and that's what matters, right? And I think to be able to create that high quality product that meets international standards, you have to have certain resources, whether it's human resources, whether it's the right kind of raw materials, whether it's right kind of international standards of procurement, production. And for that, you need funding for it as well, right? And I think that's something I realized that we started working at Sirohi in a decentralized format where the women we work with were working in villages, in their homes, because they come from a conservative background. So you can't break the rules. No, I can't force people to come and work in a centralized space. So how do you work around that? So there are obviously a lot of challenges. But if we have to sort of be able to create income opportunities for thousands of women or hundreds of women, you have to be able to sort of ensure that there is demand for their products. And the only way there will be demand for their products is if they are beautiful products which are able to sort of cater to international supply chains and international standards. So I think, exactly what Sreejith mentioned is very important. And that's where funding comes in, right? To be able to cement all these pieces together, to get the right kind of stakeholders, partners in place. And obviously at Sirohi, we made tons of mistakes. We've, sort of ruined, large bulk orders that were supposed to be sent, to countries abroad because we didn't understand what kind of packaging to use. We've messed up, and I think we're learning very early on in our journey, and I think that's where funding makes a difference, because you can invest in getting the right kind of resources, people to work with you who have experience, in the space. So that's why we would want funding versus wait for it, or wait to sort of generate enough profits to reinvest, because that just helps you sort of do what you're doing a little bit faster. That's all.
So very quickly, Gauri, I mean, the question also is that at what stage of your enterprise do you take what kind of funding? The common perception is, yeah, equity le lo, debt le lo, like those are the common ones that are available, or the other ones that are available are grants. Now, in your case, what were some of those kind of, decisions that you had to make, saying, okay, will I go for equity? Will I go for grant? What is best for my enterprise at what stage?
So, at an early stage, I think you're just learning. You understand the basic gaps, what the gaps are, and I didn't want to sort of just but like you said, with a craft-based product, it's very different, right? It's not a factory-made product where I'm convinced about the product. There will be challenges, there will be issues, no matter what. So, to sort of have investors invest in the company at an early stage, I didn't think that made the right sense. We have a hybrid model. We have a not-for-profit and a for-profit. So what we've done is we've invested and taken grant in the not-for-profit. So that way, we're not sort of losing equity in the for-profit. And that grant in the not-for-profit is helping me develop a strong foundation for the skilling aspect, for organized supply chains, so that the brand Sirohi has a very strong backend and supply chain. Plus, the foundation, the women who make it, and things like that. So for me, I think a grant-based approach has worked well. And till I know, let's say in the next year or 2 years, when I know Sirohi has really established itself as a brand, where international buyers of global repute can come and say, and I'm confident enough to say that yes, we're making certain products which we're very proud of. We still are, but of that, and we're sort of sure that we can meet
Gauri, did we lose you?
me. I think we're all stuck. Could you hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you, sort of. Yeah, you're back.
Sorry. So I think, for the first few years, for us, it's been grant based. And I think once we are more established and more confident of a supply chain, that's when, we may potentially raise funding to grow Sirohi as a brand and invest in marketing, because that's where the equity part will be important.
Thank you. Nitin, Sreejith, who wants to go first? Nitin, I know that you have very strong opinions about.
So I'll do last.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sreejith, all
Yeah,
yours.
yeah. So I will, as the name of our session suggests, I will try to kind of demystify it, quote unquote. See, we know that all of us know the fundamentals, that equity is for growth and debt is basically for the, ideally should be for managing the working capital, and debt should be taken, again, ideally when you have a very clear idea of your cash flow, when you know that, you are going to have that future cash flows in order to repay the debt. And equity also helps us, as actually Gauri pointed out, it also helps us to take some more risk than what we can do with the debt. It also allows us to do some mistakes. It allows us to do some experimentation. And therefore, till one has a clear kind of, cash flow model, a clear kind of, certainty of cash flows coming in, one should not be taking debt. And ideally, for craft sector, for all of our organizations, if we have the luxury of starting with the grants, that's of course the best thing. Or otherwise, equity is what should, will allow us to make those initial mistakes and allow us to experiment and maybe, grow the model. And again, when I say equity, it need not be, an investor. It can, there are multiple sources for equity, starting with own funds and family or friends. And then, as I think, again, Gauri mentioned, accelerators, incubators. I actually, on my part, I worked for many years with incubators and accelerators. And then of course, you move to the institutional investors. So that's, the kind of cycle that one goes through with equity funding. And along the journey, once you have your clear cash flow models in place, and you have your revenue coming in, that's when, one should be looking at debt to meet the gaps in working capital. But I also actually want to come back to one very important thing. I think Nitin mentioned that earlier about how he managed iTokri till now, which is actually, I mean, something I wanted to highlight. And thanks to Nitin for highlighting that. When we talk about sources of funding, we normally talk about debt and equity and sometimes grants. But the most important source of funding is our own revenue. And in fact, in my own observation of successful companies or the scaled up ones from any sector you take, they are the ones who have actually very, very wisely used two of the most important partners that any company has, which are your customers and your vendors. And in fact, if you're able to manage that really well, that can take care of your entire working capital. In fact, I would say your customers and your suppliers are both actually sources of your working capital. And if you are able to manage that well, then you should be able to manage your working capital quite well. You should be able to manage your cash flows. So that's basically, I mean, for every entrepreneur, that should be the first attempt. How do you manage your working capital? By understanding both your buyers and vendors and their cash flow requirements and their needs, and how do you create your own both revenue and payment systems that helps you meet your working capital without running to banks or NBFCs or financial institutions. Because if you don't have a strong vendor management and also a strong cash flow model with your customers, then taking any amount of debt is actually, I mean, is going to burn your fingers. In fact, debt actually, I mean, works well if you are able to manage your working capital well with your buyers and suppliers. And when I say suppliers, again, the immediate thought in the sector, in the craft sector, especially comes like, oh, are we talking about exploiting the artisans? Actually, not. It's all about understanding their cash flow needs. In fact, I've seen talking about managing vendors. I've seen organizations who do really well by giving a certain amount of advance to your vendors and then paying the remaining after you complete the cycle, after you get the payment from your buyers. And similarly, if you are able to manage advance from your buyers, and then you don't have to actually, I mean, look at debt for managing working capital, but then you can still look at debt for making some investments into the investment for the future. So this is one point I think, I mean, I will be never tired of highlighting this, the importance of managing your customers and your vendors and understanding your revenue model and the cash flow needs of your vendors to manage your working capital really well. And once you're able to do that, as I said, I mean, the general rules, as again to repeat, equity is for growth and debt is for your short-term needs. Talking about, I mean, rope, we have gone through these cycles. We have gone through, I mean, all kinds of, I mean, sources of funding. To begin with, initially was lucky to have some accelerators and incubators help us provide with seed money to start, and then have some venture capital investors on board, and then was able to, I mean, buy them out and give them an exit, and then manage debt from multiple sources. And then actually, I mean, burned our fingers with too much debt coming in. And then actually, again, went back to raising equity to clean up the books and now remain as a, luckily now remain as a debt-free company. Which is actually, I mean, to the extent if you can remain debt-free, I would suggest, I mean, that's the best thing for anyone by managing your cash flows well. So that's, yeah, where we are.
Thank you, Sreejith. Yeah, so what I'm hearing right now is, if you in the early stages, if you can stick to grants, and your friends and family, bring in money from people you trust. That's the easy way to do it. Keep your cash flow strong and actually look to revenue to fund what you're trying to build, at least for as long as we can. And this is, I think,
and just to add, Priya, I mean, the word, I mean, profit, as you mentioned it earlier, and the word profit has to be mentioned because profit is what you will invest for long-term growth along with equity. So it is also very important to actually be profitable and look at your profit. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I know Nitin will have a lot to say.
थोड़ा ना
But
क्वेश्चन आप एक बार थोड़ा सा रिफ्रेश करोगे ना, वो क्या
हाँ, तो नितिन, मेरा सवाल ये था कि आपके जो स्टेज है एंटरप्राइज का, तो अर्ली स्टेज है, फिर आप ग्रोथ में जाते हैं वगैरह, तो कौन से स्टेज में कौन सा टाइप का फंडिंग और इन्वेस्टमेंट आपको लगा है, एंड आपने, अकॉर्डिंग टू यू, व्हाट आर सम ऑफ द कॉमन मिस्टेक्स either you or other enterprises tend to make when it comes to raising funds, and if you have any learnings, be it while raising funds or even talking to investors, that would be great if you can
कुछ
share.
कुछ लर्निंग तो हमारी अपनी है जो हम अपने बिजनेस से सीखते हैं, कुछ ऐसा है जो दूसरे लोगों को देखते हैं कि वो लोग क्या कर रहे हैं, और दूसरे लोगों को देख करके मैंने जो सबसे ज्यादा सीखा है कि क्या नहीं करना चाहिए। तो मतलब क्या करना चाहिए वो तो आप अपने, जो आपका प्रोडक्ट है या जो आप सेल करना चाह रहे हो, जो आप बिल्ड कर रहे हो, वो आप तय करते हो कि आपको क्या करना चाहिए, बट दूसरे लोगों से आपको ज्यादातर मेरे हिसाब से ये सीखना चाहिए कि क्या नहीं करना चाहिए। तो मेरी अप्रोच शुरू से ही इसी तरीके की रही है, और हम लोगों ने यही देखा कि कहाँ किस टाइप की एक्टिविटी में हमको नहीं जाना है और क्या करना है। तो शुरू से ही हम लोगों के दिमाग में यही था कि वी हैव टू बिल्ड अ वेरी स्ट्रॉन्ग ब्रांड एंड अ स्ट्रॉन्ग प्रोडक्ट, because now what I am seeing right now is that in the whole business space, this D2C e-commerce, all of this space, the business itself is becoming a product now. I mean, business are not building a strong product, but business themselves are becoming a product. I mean, people are investing into business to sell the business, to further sell the business, and then further sell the business. Nowhere is getting profitable. 9 out of 10 businesses are not profitable. They are showing future profitability, and since long time, but the profits are not visible in those businesses. What is visible is that businesses are getting stronger. So you see that, say, business itself is becoming a profitable product, but business is not building any profitable product. So this is now for our times, like starting a new business right now, or wanting to get into the business, one should have a very clear understanding of that. If you are not building a strong product, the business is going to fall flat at some point of time, and it is going, and और एक क्राफ्ट के साथ ये और ज्यादा स्ट्रांग हो जाता है, क्योंकि क्राफ्ट वैसा प्रोडक्ट नहीं है कि आप आज ये कर रहे हो और फिर कल वो कर रहे हो. There is so much of lineage you are handling, so much of personal connections you are dealing with, so much of handwork there is happening. So it's a different kind of product you are dealing with. So the product has to be definitely strong, and then you should go for funding whichever stage you want to go, whatever tools you want to use, whether you want to do debt, you want to do equity, whatever, or grant or whatever. तो वो आपको तब भी काम करेगा जब आपका प्रोडक्ट में आपका बिलीफ बहुत स्ट्रांग है, और आप जो करना चाह रहे हो ना, वो आप उसका पूरा स्टेजेस आप देख रहे हो. यू आर एबल टू विजुअलाइज कि ये प्रोडक्ट में प्रॉफिटेबल, ये बिजनेस में एक प्रॉफिटेबल बिजनेस बना पाऊंगा और इसमें दम है मेरे बिजनेस में. तो हम लोग ने भी शुरू से इसी अप्रोच के साथ काम करा, और क्योंकि डे वन से ही हम लोग क्लियर थे कि प्रॉफिट बनाना है, क्योंकि मैं एक ट्रेडिशनल बिजनेस बैकग्राउंड से आता हूं, तो हमने कभी भी ऐसा सीखा ही नहीं था, हमें पता ही नहीं था कि मतलब बिजनेस प्रॉफिट नहीं भी बनाता है तो कोई पैसे दे देता है लगाने के लिए. तो ये हमको पता ही नहीं था ये बात. ये तो मुझे अभी 2-3 साल पहले, 4 साल पहले ही पता चला कि मतलब अगर बिजनेस प्रॉफिट नहीं भी बनाए तब भी इसमें पैसे लोग इन्वेस्ट करते रहते हैं. तो फिर तब मैंने थ्योरी थोड़ा खुला कि ये ऐसे भी हो सकता है. बट हम लोग ने तो शुरू से ही यही सीखा कि भाई बिजनेस है तो प्रॉफिट तो बनाएगा, तो जितनी जल्दी प्रॉफिट बनाएगा उतना अच्छा बिजनेस है. तो प्रॉफिट की डिजाइन ही जो बिजनेस का पूरा डिजाइन है, जो स्ट्रक्चरिंग है, सिस्टम्स है, वो यू हैव टू पुट इन प्लेस. वी हैव पुट इन प्लेस systems that we won't be burning x number of money into the marketing. प्रॉफिट हो रहा है कि नहीं हो रहा है, आप तो रेवेन्यू बढ़ाओ. इस टाइप की अप्रोच हम लोगों ने शुरू से नहीं रखी. वी वर वेरी क्लियर दैट वी विल बी इन्वेस्टिंग ओनली so much of percentage into marketing, so much of percentage into logistics, or whatever the proposition is. So we kept all of those parameters in check since beginning, that so that company becomes profitable soon. And by end of like first year, we were profitable from first year. और फिर वो बढ़ता चला गया, वो बनाते चले गए हम, वो ट्रैजेक्टरी हमारी कंटिन्यू रही। और कस्टमर भी फिर, और जो श्रीजीत ने बोला वो बहुत ही स्ट्रॉन्ग पॉइंट है कि कैसे आप वेंडर को और कैसे कस्टमर को, ये दो आपके सबसे स्ट्रॉन्ग पिलर्स हैं। अगर आपके सप्लायर को आप सॉर्टेड रखते हो, सप्लायर की पेमेंट सॉर्टेड रखते हो, उसको उसकी जो अंडरस्टैंडिंग है आपके बिजनेस के बारे में वो अगर बहुत ही क्लियर है, और दूसरी तरफ कस्टमर है जो आपके प्रोडक्ट में बिलीव करता है और ट्रस्ट करता है, तो ये राइट मिक्स जो है वो बिजनेस को एक जगह पे लेकर के आता है, और फिर आपको लिए हर टूल सक्सेसफुल है। जैसे आज जैसे हम बिजनेस, आज हम iTokri को मार्केट में हम कह रहे हैं कि भाई हम ढूंढ रहे हैं फंडिंग, या हमें एक राइट काइंड ऑफ इन्वेस्टर चाहिए, या कोई और टूल चाहिए, कुछ भी, तो लोग हाथों हाथ लेते हैं हमको। लोग सुनना चाहते हैं, क्योंकि वो देखते हैं कि ये बिजनेस बहुत स्ट्रॉन्ग वॉल्स के साथ और बहुत टाइट शिप की तरह चला है, तो वो लोगों को ये उसके अंदर पूरे स्ट्रक्चरिंग सिस्टम्स नजर आते हैं। तो वो हर बिजनेस, हर इन्वेस्टर इंटरेस्टेड है, हर टूल इंटरेस्टेड है आपके अंदर जाने के लिए। लेकिन अगर आपकी ये बेसिक पैरामीटर्स ही रॉन्ग है, और आप ये सोच, आपकी ये पहले दिन ही ऐसी अप्रोच है कि इन्वेस्टर आएगा तो मैं बिजनेस खड़ा करूंगा, या पैसे मिलेंगे तब मेरा बिजनेस खड़ा होगा, तो ये यहाँ से शुरुआत जो करते हैं, तो वो थोड़ा प्रॉब्लमैटिक अप्रोच है मेरे पर्सपेक्टिव।
Thank you, Nitin. So basically, what we're hearing is also, let's not jump to funding. Let's get our own house in order. Let's build the relationships that actually matter on ground, be it with your suppliers or with your customers, and then take it from there. And I think there is now, business studies coming out of Harvard Business School saying, the more you can actually sustain your business and build a sustainable business without taking in funding and without diluting equity, that is the best way to do it. So thank you for sharing those insights. So when we talk about, funding, obviously all of you are looking for funding, have raised funding, or are hoping to raise funding. What are some of the challenges that you've encountered? And is it enough कि पैसा मिल गया? Is it enough that, somebody gives you the money and, the story ends there? What other non-financial support will be required for enterprises, especially in the craft sector, to also grow and become scalable? Who'd like to go first? Go for it, Gauri. Always happy to hear from you.
I think I'll go second. This time.
Okay.
I just want to hear.
Yeah, Sreejith, I'm going to pick on you this time because you've actually done the whole route. Would you like to go for this one?
Again, I mean, can you just repeat the question, Priya?
Yeah. So one is, what are the challenges when it comes to, as a craft-based enterprise, to raise funding for yourself? Two, is it enough that the money comes in, or are there other kinds of non-financial support that craft-based enterprises also need to grow and scale? And what should that look like?
Okay. Yeah. See, coming to the first part of it, just before the session, I think, grappled with this question of scale. And I'm sorry, just give me a second. There's a vigorous knocking happening. Just a second. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, so we were discussing the question of scale, actually. See, the question on the kind of investor, what kind of investments, and at what stage, which kind of investment type. These are actually, very, very, if I may use that word, personal questions to every enterprise. These are actually, there is no kind of, right or wrong answers here. And that's why it's very important to understand the DNA of each one's organization, the DNA of our enterprise. It's very important to actually understand what is scale for each of us. What is, and for that matter, what is impact for each of us? What is, as we are talking about craft sector enterprises, it's important to understand what is impact for each of us. And what are we personally comfortable with when it comes to the question of scale? Because what Nitin mentioned earlier, I would say that is the most important, that how do you run a kind of a tight ship, again, for want of a better word, but which is actually, I mean, self-sustaining, and which is profitable, which for all the stakeholders, I mean, it works well for all the stakeholders. It actually, I mean, works well for your vendors. It makes your customers happy. It makes your producers happy. So when you actually, I mean, answer that question, that's where you will actually, I mean, answer this question of, okay, should I be looking for a growth at this stage? Should I be looking for actually, I mean, consolidating at this stage? Should I be looking for my unit model economics at this moment and try to improve that unit model economics? And the question of funding actually is very closely related to that. I mean, broadly, what I have in my own experience, what I have seen is money is out there, and if you are determined to raise tons of money, you can actually do that, and you can actually raise equity. I mean, you can get debt, but what is actually, I mean, the more troublesome part is what you do after that. What do you do with those investors on your board, or in your cap table, or what do you do with that debt on your balance sheet? And how do you actually, I mean, that's where, I mean, it is easy to go wrong, and that's where you will have umpteen examples of enterprises going wrong at that stage. So therefore, I mean, if you look at now approach the question of, I mean, who is the right investor and what is the right investment amount, take your time to actually understand, are you comfortable with scale, and what is the kind of scale I'm looking at? Because equity investors, if you look at the kind of, I mean, institutional equity investment you are talking about, they want scale. In fact, that's why, I mean, Nitin is quite true. The investors' business model is not around your profit; it is around your scale. It doesn't matter for them, for most institutional investors or most equity investors, that you make profit or loss. It's actually more important for them that you keep growing, so that as you keep growing, they will be able to find an exit. And so if you are actually, I mean, looking at building a sustainable, a profitable enterprise for a long time, or for generations here, then, I mean, many of those investors won't be a right fit for you. So there are, I mean, and that's why it is very, very personal question for each entrepreneur. But I will come back to my point. I mean, if you are actually, I mean, determined to raise a particular type of investment, it is available out there. But the question is, will that suit you? As I said, I naively jumped into many of these, and then to actually burn fingers and then find exits out of it. I had investors coming on board my board and then talking about, Sreejith, how do we create home runs? Like, look at Silicon Valley, and how can you create a home run like that? And it took me 2 years or 3 years to get that investor out, and then say that, okay, I mean, I'm not comfortable with that kind of that's not what we are, and ours is a different kind of animal. And then raising too much debt coming in, and then really struggling with the EMIs and the repayment requirements, and then to actually, I mean, to raise equity. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but it's a very, very personal question to each enterprise.
So basically what I'm also asking is it enough for enterprises such as ourselves, even craft-based enterprises, because we build it out of passion, and not all of us are, like, clued into the investment jargon and all of that. So is it enough for investors to just put in the money, or are there other kinds of support that an enterprise such as ours needs? And what does that support, what kind of support should that come in the form of, is what I was trying to understand.
Yeah, so there, Priya, yeah, thanks for reminding that part of the question. And there again, I won't distinguish between a craft sector enterprise or any other enterprise. Of course, each of us needs a lot more other non-financial support and partnerships to fall in place. Whether it is getting your basic, see, when I was an investor, the first point of discussion with an enterprise was to understand the unit model of economics, and I've seen early stage enterprises needing help there itself to actually, I mean, to put in paper what is the unit model economics I'm talking about, and then, I mean, managing the accounts, or for that matter, understanding the particular industry that they are in, and creating a go-to market strategy. And coming back to that point on understanding the industry, each of us, even though largely we are in the craft space, closely looking, our own individual spaces are quite different. Our peers are actually, quite different. The peers of iTokri and rope are actually, will be totally different. Even though, you will call largely we are in the craft space. So understanding that the ecosystem that one operates in, the industry peers that one has, and what are their, the practices and their the events or what is happening in the industry. So all these areas, whether it is your go-to-market strategy, accounts, finance, or getting your the whole financial model in place, all of these are areas where one needs help, one needs support. And if there are some investors actually, come in not just with money, but with these kinds of supports. But there again, I will be a slightly contrarian there. I would say that go with your own independent service providers. Don't try to actually combine multiple things in one partner. Okay, I get investment and they will also help me build my financial model, get my unit economic model right. That may not happen that way. It's important for the entrepreneur to appreciate each of these and then look at expertise outside available. And then sometimes, you of course get pro bono, sometimes you have to pay for it. And if you have to pay for it, you have to pay for it. Otherwise, what we get without paying. So yeah, but yes, you need tons of all those kinds of support there.
Okay, thanks, Sreejith. I also want to be mindful of time, and if people are willing to stay on, because this conversation is getting interesting, but I'll stick to maybe one more question. But I'd like to hear from both Nitin and Gauri about, what are some of the challenges, that you face when you are trying to raise money for your craft enterprise, and two, is it enough? If money enough, or is there other kinds of support that you also need to build and grow your enterprise? Nitin, Gauri. Gauri, you said two. You're going second.
Okay, sure, I can go. So I think, I really echo Sreejith's words on this, that it's very important to, be confident of your cash flows, one, as to, for see your history, see your data, see your sales, and just see like the growth path, right? Are you being able to get sustained sales? Like, is there validation from the market for your products? That's number one. Number two is that what are you really raising investor money for? I think this has just become like, the thing to do, that, I raise money and get yourself out there, on LinkedIn with all this thing. And I think that gives you that credibility sometimes. But as an organization, I think you have to take that call and really understand why. What am I raising it for? Because then the pressure really comes in, when it comes to investors. Whether it's a grant, whether it is equity, debt, any other instrument that you're looking at. And I think in the early years, depending on where you want to be, and I think there is that very strong difference between, let's say, a commercial e-commerce D2C brand, that there is, that is still working with like employing a large number of people, whether it's, let's say like Mama Earth, Sugar Cosmetics, and, these are like large D2C brands that are scaled fairly large. And then, of course, the craft economy and the craft-based businesses. So once you really understand what the funding is for, then maybe you should reach out to investors, because investors are becoming fairly smart as well. And I've been out there, just to talk to people, get a sense of what's happening. There are lots of craft-based businesses, all of them want B2B, for them to see scale. They're all just like, what is your B2B strategy? Nobody is thinking about e-commerce, online businesses. They want to see scale. How are you, doing like 5 crores a month and taking it to 6 crores and 7 crores by next year? Because at the end of it, they're like sharks. They want, a strategy. They want an exit strategy. They want to make money over it. No one is really being philanthropic here. No matter how much of an impact you're creating, they're seeing your data, they're seeing your numbers. So as an entrepreneur, are you ready for that? Unfortunately, passion will only sustain you this much. It's only going to be a business and data oriented approach that's going to take you further ahead and sustain your business or your work as such, right? So I think that aspect is very important. I don't think you should, just get starry-eyed by seeing what's happening out there and just go out there to raise funds because it's the right thing to do. but essentially really understand your business. What stage is it at? Are you even ready? Are you ready to sort of raise funds? If you're raising funds, what is it for? Is it for marketing? Is it for working capital, raw materials, hiring people? What is it for? and and when you get that money, what are you going to use it for that will lead to sort of like exponential growth for you in, let's say, 1 year or 2 years? And if you're able to sort of make sense of that, answer those questions not from just a verbal point of view but a very strong data oriented approach, I think then you should go for funding. Like there are tons of people out there who are willing to give you money, who have the right kind of instruments that might be relevant for you. But don't just do it because you think that maybe that's what everyone's doing. I don't think that's the right
Gauri, I'm
approach.
just going to quickly interrupt because I also want to understand, one of the things that we've been sort of hearing when we even speak to funders is that not everybody wants to give money to the craft sector. There are a lot of funders who are sort of, and in your experience, have you seen the same? And what is missing in, the craft sector sort of, or enterprises such as ourselves being able to raise money? And we also, I remember having spoken about, do women need to be supported differently? Do incubators need to be supported differently? Do we have to have women, because this sector is also full of women entrepreneurs? Do we need a different kind of support? Could you maybe expand on that, on your experience, and maybe share a few examples of where you think we are losing out?
I think the first point as to why are people not willing to sort of invest in the craft economy is fairly simple. Scale. They don't see scale. They don't see sustained growth. Because the craft economy for the longest time has been very dependent on an external sort of external audience in terms of buyers, right? And during COVID, we saw that disrupted supply chains because of logistical issues. A lot of the craft economies, India is dependent on international markets for sales, for higher revenues, and I think because of that dependency, that might lead to essentially skepticism from the investor community, because there is no real I would say no real, but I think the demand for craft based goods in India versus internationally is a lot lower. I think people are now more conscious about their consumption patterns in India, so they're more open to craft based, consciously made products, handmade products. um, and that's what I've seen. Even for Sirohi, when I talk about it as an e-commerce company, I get eyeballs that, okay, interesting, but what's your B2B strategy? How are you going to show me X amount of sales and orders? And so to me, I think scale is the biggest question for most investors. Growth. How are you investing in marketing? How are you sort of going to run ads to sort of show digital growth? What is your e-commerce strategy? So I think that's one. The second one is always an interesting one for me, being a woman, being an entrepreneur who is a woman. I think I'm not the biggest fan of the term she and her, because at the end of it, I'm an entrepreneur, and yes, I'm a woman. I'm a mother, I'm a daughter, I'm a wife, I'm all of those things, but I'm also an entrepreneur. And yes, it has its challenges, and I've faced that, as somebody who has a 10-month-old daughter. When I have been out there, talking about partnerships, collaborations, is that yes, there is empathy. People will sort of say that, oh, you have a daughter, or you maybe we should have this investor conversation later, because I'm sure you have your hands full. And I think that's what leads to a slower growth path for entrepreneurs who are women. And I think that's why, and I don't think there is need for women's focused programs because we are women. I think we're equally smart, intellectual, and the right kind of skill sets and educational capabilities. But I think the need for funds or programs that are supporting women is because we go through these challenges, which means that a lot of women drop out of the workforce. People, stop working, or they re-enter the workforce after their kids are much older. And it's mostly women who sort of take that back step. It's a personal choice whether you decide to continue and what speed you go at. I have faced that issue, because Sirohi was growing, and I had a daughter. So, and I know, how challenging it's been and the kind of sacrifices I've had to make, personally, family. And I think and it's up to, I think, and it's a personal choice. You decide what space you want to go at, and that's the reason why women focused programs need to be there. And don't give us advice on how to raise money, but what is important is that, okay, if you're going to have a child, which you should, maybe you need a fund which is going to help women invest and get help so that she can run a business and she has help for her child so she can continue doing what she's doing. And I think the kind of action points for women entrepreneurs who are women is that maybe they need more resources to hire so they can work a little lesser while they have a child, or maybe they need to have money so they can invest in a creche. I'm fairly privileged to have a nanny, and that's why I'm able to sit here and have this conversation with you. But otherwise, I would have to be taking care of my child and making sure she's being fed or whatever it is, and not a lot of women have that. And I think that's what programs that are focusing on women need to do versus supporting us to raise money.
Thank you, Gauri. Thank you so much. And last but not the least, Nitin, I know you have very, very strong opinions about what investors want and the challenges around raising money for a craft-based enterprise.
See, what investor want is basically जो अभी चल रहा है ना, उसमें तो यही कि हमको 2x, 3x, 5x आप करते चले जाओ तो वो खुश हैं. वो उनको समझ में नहीं आता कि आप प्रोडक्ट क्या कर रहे हो, किस इंडस्ट्री में डील कर रहे हो. और मेरे हिसाब से बिजनेसेस, चाहे वो किसी भी तरह का बिजनेस हो, चाहे कोई इन्वेस्टमेंट टूल हो, अनलेस वो बिजनेस को समझता है ना, वो दोनों की राइट काइंड ऑफ कोलैबोरेशन नहीं हो सकता है. अगर एक इन्वेस्टर एक ऐसे बिजनेस में पैसे लगा रहा है जहां जो बिजनेस का स्ट्रक्चर ही कंप्लीटली अलग तरीके से काम करता है, और वो एक्सपेक्ट उससे कुछ ऐसी चीज कर रहा है जो वो कभी भी क्रिएट नहीं कर सकता, तो वो दोनों ही फ्लॉप हो जाएंगे. उसका पैसा भी डूब जाएगा और बिजनेस भी डूब जाएगा. ये हमने बहुत सारे क्राफ्ट बिजनेसेस में देखा है पिछले 5-10 सालों में, जहाँ जो क्राफ्ट बेस्ड सेटअप है वो ऐसे इन्वेस्टर के पास गया जो बहुत ही स्टैंडर्ड है, उसके समझ उसकी एक जूते की फैक्ट्री या जूते के ब्रांड में लगाना और क्राफ्ट में लगाना सेम है, तो वो दोनों ही चीज फ्लॉप हुआ, पैसा भी डूब गया, बिजनेस भी बंद हो गया. तो हमें ये सोचना है कि हम किस तरह के सेक्टर में काम कर रहे हैं, ये सेक्टर क्या है. ये सेक्टर एक जो दुनिया जिस दिशा में जा रही है ना, उसकी विपरीत दिशा में जाने वाला सेक्टर है. मतलब एकदम अपोजिट डायरेक्शन में मूव करने वाला सेक्टर है. हम लोग पहले 400-500 साल पहले जब मशीनें नहीं हुआ करती थी, तब भी हम लोग हाथ से बनाते थे. मशीनों की जरूरत क्यों पड़ने लगी, एक फैक्ट्री और इंडस्ट्रियल प्रोडक्ट की जरूरत क्यों पड़ने लगी? क्योंकि हमें वॉल्यूम की रिक्वायरमेंट थी, हमें स्केल चाहिए था. स्केल मशीनों ने बनाया, ठीक है. तो हाथ का काम कम होता चला गया, कम लोग हाथ का काम करने लगे, क्योंकि अब जितने रिक्वायरमेंट है वो रिक्वायरमेंट अब मशीन पूरी कर रही है, और हाथ के काम की उतनी जरूरत नहीं, तो वो रिक्वायरमेंट कम होती चली गई. लेकिन हम आज जब 2022 में 2022 में बैठ के कह रहे हैं कि हम हाथ का सामान बेच रहे हैं, तो आप बेसिकली एक ऐसी चीज बेचना चाह रहे हो, ऐसे सेक्टर में काम करना चाह रहे हो जो दुनिया का डेवलपमेंट, मतलब वर्ल्ड की इकोनॉमी का जो ग्रोथ का पैटर्न है, वो जो कंजम्पशनल ग्रोथ है, जो कंजम्पशन बेस्ड है, जिसमें आप जितना ज्यादा यूज करते हो, जितना ज्यादा कंज्यूम करते हो, उतना ही वो बिजनेसेस ग्रो करते हैं. जितना आप प्लानेट को में जो है वो उसको जितना ज्यादा उसके अंदर से निकालते हो, उतना ज्यादा इकोनॉमी ग्रो करती है. 2 साल तक कोरोना में क्या हुआ, लोगों ने यूज करना चीजों को कम कर दिया, तो इन्वायरमेंट बहुत अच्छा हो गया, सब चीज बहुत अच्छी थी. दिल्ली में बैठ के पहाड़ दिख रहे थे, है ना, तो ये सब चीजें हो रही थी. चंडीगढ़ से लोग क्या क्या देख रहे थे, तो वो अब नहीं हो रही ना, क्योंकि लेकिन हमारी इकोनॉमी डाउन हो गई. सब जगह हो गया कि भाई एवरीथिंग इज डाउन, बिकॉज सी वी आर कंज्यूमिंग टू मच. And we are dealing, when we are dealing with a craft sector, when we are working in craft industry, basically we are dealing in a product which is sustainable. Again and again we are saying this word, using this word. What this word actually means is basically that we are using something which can be less consuming oriented, that it is being, you consume too much. तो वो नहीं है, ये वो प्रोडक्शन यहाँ से नहीं है. तो यहाँ जो स्केल आएगा, यहाँ जो वॉल्यूम आएगा, या इस प्रोडक्ट के अंदर जिस तरह की बिजनेसेस डेवलप होंगे, तो वो बिजनेसेस को का जो ग्रोथ पैटर्न है, वो ग्रोथ पैटर्न वैसा नहीं होगा जैसे किसी ऐसे बिजनेस का होगा जो एकदम बिल्कुल आप उसको यूज करते चले जाओ और करो और करो और करो. सो इट इज नॉट लाइक दैट. सो any financial institution or a tool who wants to invest in this sector, so they have to, that tool has to be designed in a way where that it profits the business. और वो दोनों तरफ से काम करे और इम्पैक्ट भी क्रिएट करे, प्रॉफिट भी क्रिएट करे, बिजनेस भी बढ़े. अब जैसे शेयर मार्केट होता है, शेयर मार्केट के अंदर एफएनओ भी होता है, फ्यूचर एंड ऑप्शंस होता है ना. उसमें एक दिन में पैसा डबल हो जाता है, 2 दिन में डबल हो जाता है, 1 घंटे में 4 गुना भी हो जाता है, और 1 घंटे में वो पैसा जितना भी आपने लगाया है वो पूरा डूब भी जाता है. लेकिन शेयर मार्केट, शेयर जो जो स्टॉक ऑप्शंस होता है उसमें ऐसा नहीं होता. स्टॉक आप खरीदो तो ऐसा नहीं है ना कि वो एक दिन में जो है वो 50% डाउन हो गया या 40, वो धीरे धीरे डाउन होता है, 8%, 10%, मार्केट थोड़ा सा गिरता है थोड़ा. तो यू हैव अ स्पेस, सो यू हैव वन प्रोडक्ट विच इज future and options. One product there is which is share, you direct invest into stocks. Then there is another option which is little safer option, which is mutual funds, which give you a good amount of reasonable profit, but you can't expect that percentage of profit from that a product which you are investing in. So we need to have investors who understand that this craft sector businesses are not like FNOs or not like directly buying stock, but they are more like mutual funds. So the investment may be secure, it will be secure, it will be profitable, will be sustainable, because there's no blowing up of business. It's just growing organically, and it is making a lot of impact, and it is sustainable, it is going to stay, है ना. बट वो ऐसा नहीं कि वो बहुत ज्यादा एकदम ऐसे आउट ऑफ द ब्लू 2x 5x हो जाएगा. तो ये एक चैलेंज है मेरे हिसाब से. तो मैं मतलब यही कहना चाहता हूँ.
Thank you. We are over time, but I do see that there are a couple of questions that have come in. I believe there is one question, I think, which Nitin, you have in some ways answered, where we talk about when we are advocating for slow living, where we're advocating for, less consumption. How do we then also push for more consumption? Because that is what our businesses also hinge on. So, do we need to educate the investors? Do we need to educate consumers? What else needs to be done? Because obviously we're working in a sector, we are actually asking for people to go slow, and most investors don't seem to understand that. So does anyone want to answer that question? Because that's a tough one for a business.
यानी मैं ये नहीं कहूंगा कि वो गलत है अपने तरीके से या समझना नहीं चाहते हैं. मैं बस ये कहना चाहता हूँ कि ये लैक है, ये गैप है ना, और इसमें बहुत पोटेंशियल है. ये इसको हम ऐसे ना देखें कि ये कोई एक चैलेंज है या ये उनकी कोई प्रॉब्लम है या वो हमारी बात नहीं समझ पा रहे. मैं इसको ऐसे देखना चाहता हूँ कि ये एक गैप है जिसको कोई इन्वेस्टर फुलफिल नहीं कर पा रहा है. यहाँ एक ऐसा राइट काइंड ऑफ जो इन्वेस्टमेंट टूल है वो अवेलेबल नहीं है हमारे पास. अगर चाहे वो गवर्नमेंट पॉलिसी लेवल पे हो या प्राइवेट इन्वेस्टर्स हैं, इक्विटी इन्वेस्टर्स हैं, तो इस तरह का एक टूल डेवलप आना चाहिए जहाँ जहाँ जो है वो इस तरह के जो बिजनेस है, जो सस्टेनेबल लाइफस्टाइल, जो फ्यूचर ओरिएंटेड है, उनको सपोर्ट करें, जो कॉज बेस्ड हो, इस तरह के बिजनेसेस में इन्वेस्ट करें, है ना. और वो ऐसे मतलब भागता हुआ पैसा, मतलब एकदम दिन में 1 साल में डबल हो जा रहा है, फिर 4x 5x एग्जिट. सो दे डोंट टॉक इन दैट टर्मिनोलॉजी, but you have a designed very specific financial tools for businesses like these who are working in sustainability sector, be it crafts or be it other food and a lot of other segments also.
Thank you. And maybe one last question. Shikha, I know you said, what do investors who invest expect out of craft-based startups? We had a conversation last week where investors have talked about what they expect. So I'm not going to get into that. Is there any other question? I know there was another question around CSR grants. We can talk about it next week because we have a session dedicated to philanthropic capital. So you please attend that session. And yeah, I mean, I just have one last question for all of you. I know we are over time, but what do you think enterprises such as yourselves need? What does the ecosystem itself need to look like to help support enterprises such as yourselves grow? What do you need for this ecosystem itself to happen?
Okay, I can go. I think what we need is a set of investors who are from the craft space, right? Who've been there, who've been craft-based entrepreneurs, who understand essentially what are the needs, what are the requirements. It's not that the craft-based economy is not growing. We are growing, but the pace is different, right? It takes time. I think our requirements are different. It is not aligned with what the current existing investor mindset expects of us, right? I've been part of various cohorts, which are essentially that support not-for-profits, grant-based, and I don't think they've ever understood what we need. Everyone's sort of talking about scale, beneficiary scale. They all want, how are you going to impact thousands and millions of artisans? What is your strategy to do that? On the other side, you've got investors saying that how are you going to scale and show us like X growth, on a monthly basis. So I think from both aspects, as much as I would, shouldn't you use the word we are fished, and because you've got the impact aspect of it, because we're working with artisans. So what's your scale strategy there? We're working with artisans who make handcrafted products. We're focusing on conscious slowed down production and consumption patterns. So how are you going to scale? So honestly, I think it needs to be somebody from the craft based space who sort of switches sides to maybe become an investor, and then sort of looks at focusing on investing in people like us. That's one. And I think number two is every craft-based organization is different. Some have a factory model, some have a decentralized model, some have a producer group model. So I think the requirements of every sort of social enterprise is different. And I think even craft-based organizations need to understand why they need funding, what for. I think what a kind of funding Sreejith might need might not be relevant for me at Sirohi, right? What is relevant for Nitin and iTokri might not be relevant for Sreejith, because we are focusing on B2B, one is focusing on take on it, but I think that there's still some time till our needs and our requirements can be understood. And I think as entrepreneurs, we need to understand them first before we can articulate them to anybody else.
Thank you. Nitin, Sreejith, any last thoughts on apart from, funders trying to understand what you need, what else is needed in the ecosystem for enterprises such as yourselves to grow?
I will go first. So, echoing on some of the thoughts that came here, I know your question is apart from finance, but I totally agree with Gauri on that. And also Nitin also mentioned about the need for more investors who understand this space, or with the kind of, right kind of expectations on their return and exit framework, etc. So that is about capital. And if you look at the other two areas which are critical, one is about the demand, the other is about the product. So these three, I would say, are the most critical parts: the capital, product, and the market or the demand, because we know artisans exist. So we know, there are lakhs or millions of artisans exist, and they need employment. And of course, one needs to retrain them. But largely talking about, and now that we are dealt with finance and capital, largely talking about the product and the market. I have a slightly contrarian view on, are we going against the current? Are we, is there a conflict that we are trying to slow down the consumption while actually advocating consumption? I think craft is also about responsible consumption. And when I say responsible, it's about creating enough alternatives for people to actually move to more responsible choices in their life without actually reducing the level of consumption. And if you are able to do that, if you are able to actually, I mean, contemporize the products and offer alternate options, opportunities for customers to actually move to more responsible consumption. And that is where I think, I mean, one answering your question, I was the other day I was talking to one design school teacher, and she was telling me that Sreejith, what to do, all our students want to do is to end up on the ramp. They don't want to actually, I mean, work with artisans. They don't want to actually travel. And so one critical challenge there is institutional partnerships. Especially, I mean, with design schools within the country, outside the country, and design institutions. So one is that, I mean, we need a lot more collaborations and partnerships on the product side. And the market, as I was talking about, I mean, we need to promote as a sector more responsible consumption, more move to sustainability as a theme. And India is actually lagging there. Maybe, I mean, it's not a question of affordability, actually. I mean, for the 200 or 300 million urban customer base that we have, it is not a question of affordability. It is more of a question of, I mean, having the right choices and the awareness and opportunities. So we need to actually promote that. We have some large fairs happening in India, looking at, I mean, trying to bring buyers from outside. But we also need to do much more to actually sensitize Indian customers, and that's another area to work. If you, I mean, other than capital, I would highlight these two.
Thanks, Sreejith. Nitin, over to you. You can have the last word, so to speak.
No, I think I've said almost everything. So don't have much actually. So I've
I
summed
mean,
up.
what do you need as an enterprise, really, apart from the money itself? What would help an enterprise such as yourself grow? And please excuse all the yelling and screaming in the background, but
That's fine. That's fine. See, what an enterprise actually needs other than what the funding is basically to build a good peer network across around your business. So that you don't, especially when we're talking about craft sector, because craft sector is a different, it's a space where peer-to-peer understanding and peer-to-peer networking is very much important, because it's a community oriented production. It is not something like very factory stuff. So people know people, and people know people who are making stuff. So we have been very focused about this, and we have always tried to build the community around our business. That, I mean, be it the vendors we are procuring from, or the customers who we are selling to. So it's more like a community kind of a feeling, that people believe in your product, believe in your business. So this is the space which is beyond investors. This is a space which is apart from the money and just the product what you are doing. So, and this goes with any craft business if you want to build in future, क्योंकि ये लोगों का craft एक बहुत ही cost driven product है. It's not just any product. So that has been my learning and my need as a business, and that's what I would recommend.
Thank you. I'm going to not keep you guys any longer, because I think we've already overextended our time. But I hope this conversation was useful. The recordings will be up on our YouTube channel, and it will be widely available, freely accessible to everybody. But I do want to take this time to thank Gauri, Nitin, Sreejith for taking the time out and sharing your experiences really in navigating this funding space, because it is a challenge for all of us. But if you have any questions for any of them, feel free to share it with us. And you can also reach out to them independently. If you'd like to share your email addresses, feel free to do that. And here's to more collaborations and conversations in this sector. Thanks again. And next week, please do join us for another session on philanthropic capital. So questions around CSR, questions around grants, all that will be responded by two speakers who have navigated that space. Thanks again, everyone,
Yeah.
and really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you.